I'm Superintendent of Schools here at Marcus Whitman, and I want to welcome you to our 2020-21 school budget vote official public hearing. If you could take a moment, please, we're all going to stand and pledge allegiance to the flag. I would appreciate it. Here's a flag right here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And again, I want to thank you for taking the opportunity tonight to join us for this budget presentation and live on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions for me, you can type in your questions in the chat feature. And what will happen is at the end, our moderator, Shireen Benedict, who's also our board clerk, she'll copy and paste those questions for me to take a look at, and I'll answer them as best I can. So what I'm going to do right now, without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to begin our presentation of our budget. If you had an opportunity to take a look at our budget presentation before today, you know that we had a few things in mind, but by and large, we're focusing our budget right around what our students need and what our students do, and also our staff and employees. And many of you have had an opportunity to see them perform so well over the years, but especially now during this COVID time when people have been kind of quarantined and all of that. And I think that the education and the food service and the cleaning and the technology and the bus driving and all the pieces that we have, I think have been done incredibly well. We hope we never have to do it again once we kind of get through this, but if we do, we've learned a lot of things along the way, and we'll be moving forward in a better way. So I'm going to take you through the budget here. And what I want to do is kind of show you our academic accomplishments from around vote time last year, so the school budget vote last year would have been about a week ago. It should have been last Tuesday for us, but with COVID, you all know that we're doing voting by absentee on June 9th. But one of the things that I'd like to take a look at is from the time people cast their vote last year, last May, through today, what are some of the highlights that have happened in each of the things that we do in the district for our students? And the first one would be our academic accomplishments from last May to today. Our completion rate, which means if a student enters Marcus Whitman, that they do complete. That's 91%. That is very, very good. That's definitely much higher than the state average, which is around 68%. And it just shows that dedication to what we do. The region's completion rate means how many students were able to pass all 5 of the Regents exams to put them in line to get a Regents diploma or Regents graduation is 88%. CTE stands for Career and Technical Endorsement. That's an important piece for us too, because we're a community that has a lot of people that enter the workforce right from high school. And CTE has many different endorsements or designations that they give. And a lot of these high school students can leave high school with either computer programming or other types of endorsements, and they can immediately enter the workforce and really make decent money. So our CTE endorsements here, we have 21 CTE designations, which is fantastic. And then also our students that attend 2 or 4-year colleges is 69%. Again, I don't want you to see that as a low number. We're a community where a lot of our students get designations or endorsements or go on to job training and enter the workforce and do incredibly well for themselves. And I'm a superintendent, you'll get to know who, as long as you're contributing to society, I'm totally happy with that. So if that's college, that's great. If that's a career, that's great. If that's a trade, that's great. If that's the military, that's great. Whatever you're doing, except for playing Xbox in your parents' basement, works for me. And so academically here, we're doing very, very well as a school district. In our fine arts department, there are many accomplishments that are happening, especially from last May to today. And I'll just read a couple of these. One of them is the student art show is incredibly competitive. And this year we had over 250 pieces of artwork displayed from schools all over Western New York. And we had a student that received an honorable mention for her pastel drawing. That's very incredible. And then we've also got how many seniors are enrolling in colleges or universities and are going to be majoring in different graphic arts fields. And what that says to me as a superintendent is that our art program is very strong to be able to have students who can leave here and go on and do that in college. Just kind of, again, featuring a few of the pieces that are here. Six senior Marcus Whitman senior students taking independent study in art this year. That means that they're so focused on their arts that on top of their regular course load, they've decided to do some independent study to fit in some of those extra classes. One of the pieces that we're really proud of and want to be able to show you as soon as we can get people back in these buildings are how great our renovation has been for our art wing and music wing. Just absolutely incredible. For me to come in as a superintendent in May, June, and see what we had versus what we have today, it literally is night and day. And if you attended this school, you'll see what I'm talking about. And I was hoping to have kind of a ribbon cutting and get people in and do a tour. And, COVID kind of stopped all of that for us. But once we can get back into the buildings, we'll be sure to do that. Something else I think you'll be very, very proud of, as I am, has to do with how many students we have that are in all county bands, or whether it's band, jazz band, orchestra. Then we have our all-state band selections, and then the actual numbers of students that we have in the various groups that we've got. For a district our size, these are incredibly robust and strong, and that really is a hats off to all of our fine art professionals that are really doing a nice job to keep people A, interested, and then B, to help them to be better musicians and artists and all that. So we couldn't be more pleased and proud of what's happening there. In athletics, I know this is a little bit small, but if you're not able to see this right away, you can check the recording of this, and we're actually going to have this budget presentation on our website as well. So if you want to check it out on your own, you'll be able to do that too. But from last May through today, I want you to be able to see, we had 42% participation rate in our spring of 19, leading us up to our winter, which had 32% participation rate. I want you to understand that in the wintertime, most of our sports are much smaller. You have basketball, then you have wrestling, you have sports that can't have as many athletes as you can have probably in a spring or a fall. Pieces that we're very, very proud of. If you look at the list, we've had teams that have had league titles. We've had how many all-stars over the years, but the most important thing for me are how many scholar athlete teams that we've had throughout the various seasons. That's not the easiest thing to achieve. Your team has to have a cumulative average of over 90% in order to be considered a scholar athlete team. And if I was to focus on the most recent sports season, the winter, you can see that we had 7 sports. We had 5 scholar athlete teams. That's just really incredible. And then, as many of you know, we had our boys basketball team that won sectionals, which was incredible. It's been a long time for them as well, and that momentum continues to build. All of our sports did very, very well. In the bottom right, the picture that I hope you can see is of our unified bowling. This is the first year in Whitman history where we participated in unified sports. And unified sports gives us an opportunity to bring students with special needs together with our general education students, and they participate in sports together. And we did actually have a student who participated in our unified bowling team and then made our regular bowling team and went on to be a sectional champion. So there's lots of cool stories. If we had school, we'd be right in the middle of our unified basketball season, which is really fun to watch, and it's competitive. It's one of the things that I really cherish as a superintendent is being able to participate and watch the students participate. So hopefully by this time next year, we're doing the unified basketball. So each budget season, and I was saying to some of the board members when this started, it's my 20th budget building season as a superintendent, my 21st overall, because I got to build a budget as a business administrator before becoming a superintendent. And each year presents its challenges. And this year, What we are going to get or not going to get in state aid is certainly a challenge. The tax cap that the governor has had in effect since 2012 is always a challenge for people. And then lastly, for the first time ever, has been this whole COVID thing. And the reason why it's been a problem for a variety of reasons, but especially on the budget, is COVID has really taken a toll on revenues around the state, and so the state is in a deficit. And what that does is it constantly puts us in a position of, well, what are schools going to get, and how do you balance a budget depending upon what the school is going to get in terms of aid. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we move forward. When we're talking about preparing our budget for next year, I really talk about it as the new normal. The new normal for me, again, as a longtime superintendent, was the period of time after the Great Recession, which was really that 2012-13 school year. We all adjusted to this thing called a new normal. Prior to that, a lot of schools, when they did their budgeting, would just kind of roll over their budget because there was always money there. But during the Great Recession, schools had to make some very challenging choices in order to balance budgets. And so we kind of called that the new normal. I don't know what we're going to call COVID once we kind of get through this a little bit further. I don't know if we're going to call it the new normal or what. But one of the pieces that you'll learn about me as a superintendent and working with the Board of Education to develop a budget is I'm a big believer in always adjusting staffing to our enrollment. One of the things that I see when I mentor new superintendents especially is people afraid to say no. And sometimes when you're afraid to say no, when you're a leader, you wind up in a situation where 1 year you have to make a lot of reductions in order to balance a budget. What I like to do is kind of do what businesses do is constantly look at staffing, look at the number of students that we have, match the two, and make those decisions each and every year. And in some years that means you make a reduction. In some years that means you have to make an addition of staffing. It depends. This will be one of those years where we have to make a reduction to some of our staffing in order to balance with our enrollment, but then also to balance the budget. We're also going to be working within the tax cap. Taxpayers are able to get certain rebates and those kinds of things when the school district works within or under the tax cap. And in every year that I've been superintendent that we've had a tax cap, knock on wood, we've been able to produce a budget that has worked within the tax cap, but has still met the budget goals. And this year is going to be no different. But we also want to take a look at what existing resources do we have, and how can we maybe move those resources to fund current or future needs. So in other words, if we've always done something the same way for 20 years, let's say 5 years ago, that something stopped being relevant, but we keep putting money in the budget for it, it's time to look at that. It's time to make a change to what we do and take those resources and put them into some of the pieces of the budget that are currently relevant or are going to be relevant moving forward. And that's what this budget does as well. I always like to be able to tell taxpayers, what does this current budget do also? Well, it's going to maintain existing programs. So we're not coming to you and saying, hey, we're going to be removing a whole program from what we do. We may be making some changes to programs, but every program that we had this year is a program that we're going to have next year. It may just look a little bit different. Two pieces that we're going to be providing some additional academic support for are in the area of special education, and then this other piece called instructional support services. It's important for you to know what an instructional support service is, because especially as students have been out of school now for 3 months, we've got a lot of students who are doing the absolute best they can. So are their teachers, so are their moms and dads or other caregivers. But let's face it, it's been 3 months of something that's not normal. They've been out of school, and there are going to be some gaps that begin to exist. And we needed to put some resources into how will we close those gaps in learning that exist for some students and more students than ever. And that's why we put some additional resources in the budget to make sure that we're able to handle that through professional development, through working with our parents, working with our students, and working with our teachers. And then the same thing applies for special education. If we're providing services to students with special needs here in a school setting, and then all of a sudden I can't do them all, when a child is at home. Well, we're going to have to do those services either in the summertime when we can, if we're able to get people back together, or in the fall if we're able to get students back together. So this budget supports any and all combinations of that. And then I also put in here providing resources for district initiatives. And I hope that when I present this budget next year, I'm able to say it provides resources for strategic planning initiatives. This district has done a tremendous job of identifying what it needs to do to get better. Where I think I can help as the superintendent is bringing that all together and calling that a strategic plan, because in a strategic plan, we'll be able to put some specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic and timely, or SMART goals together. So I can always show you, if I see at Wegmans or see it someplace, I can always show you exactly how we're doing on the different goals that we have. That'll be the one change that I hope to be able to make for next year. You were able to see from some of the emails and things that I put out this year, being a U.S. News and World Reports school, being a New York State school of recognition. I mean, that tells us that what we're doing is working. But I'm the kind of person that wants to be able to really drill down and have a conversation with people about each and every single thing that we're doing and being able to measure that. And that's what will hopefully be able to happen by the time I'm presenting this next year. Also, the budget consists of expenditures, or the money that we have to spend. And then it also consists of revenues, the money we take in. Sometimes when that money we take in, and I'll talk about that in a few slides here, if that can't come from regular resources like New York State aid or building aid in a capital project, you do two things. You can use your fund balance, and that's money that you have that's kind of, it's money that's left over at the end of the budget, and there's different places to put it. School districts are allowed to keep 4% of the current year's budget in what's called a fund balance, which is like a savings account that we can grab when we need it. Or we do the rest of the balancing of the budget through taxing. So what this budget does is we used reductions in expenditures by making some cuts in our budget. We're going to use some fund balance, and then we have the rest coming from a tax levy in order to balance the budget. I think it's important to note that even though we're kind of a government entity, if you will, school districts are not allowed to operate in the negative. We're not allowed to have a negative. The federal government can have a negative in their budget, but school districts cannot. I mentioned to you before, this budget also falls within the governor's tax cap. The governor's tax cap for Marcus Whitman is 5.33%. Why is that so high? It's a great question. The tax cap formula is pretty complicated. I have a slide that I'll show you in a few minutes. But what happens for us, whenever you're doing a capital project, chances are good that it's going to have an impact on your tax cap where you're able to bring it, if you need to, it goes above the 2%. We don't make up any of those numbers. All the numbers that go into the tax cap, as I'll show you, are given to us, and it goes into a formula, and the formula tells us what the tax cap is. But what I also like to do is I like to look to the future. I don't like building budgets that are kind of stuck in the mud or 1-year budgets. I think it makes it look like we don't know what we're doing when you do that. You have to look out. I call it having those 5-year eyes on a budget. In this case of COVID and not knowing exactly what's going on, we can almost reach out that far, but not quite. But we are reaching out more than 1 year with how we're conducting our budget. This is the exciting tax cap formula. So if you saw my tweet today and you said that, and I told you that you'd be coming to look at an exciting budget presentation, well, here it is. The tax cap formula was put in back in 2012 after the Great Recession, actually on the way out of the Great Recession, as a way to kind of limit how high taxes could be for school districts. And then if you were above your tax cap, you had to have what's called a supermajority of your taxpayers to approve it. You'll see I used to teach math before I became a superintendent, so this kind of makes sense to me. But if I've also been doing this for a lot of years, the biggest pieces in here that impact a tax cap either in a positive or negative way, one of them has to do with what's called the tax base growth. So if there's construction that's going on in your school district, that'll impact the tax base growth and can increase that. If you've got other pieces like pilot payments, so let's just say we had Let's say somebody came to us and asked us if to put in a solar farm or something like that and have a pilot or a payment in lieu of taxes, that would have an impact on the tax cap as well. The allowable levy growth factor is also something that we receive that can impact that. So that gives us what's called the tax levy limit. And when that was done for Marcus Whitman, and we put that all in the spreadsheet and figured it out, that came out to 5.33%. Now, here's a slide that I want to show you for the history, just some brief history of the tax cap for Marcus Whitman. So in 2015-16, if you look, I'm going to use my mouse pointer right here. If you look here, the allowable tax levy in 2015-16 was 2.64%. The tax levy percent increase that the district chose to use was 2.54%. So you look over here, the amount below the tax cap was $13,220. And and if you follow through, you can see the different years, what the allowable tax levy increases were, and then what the district ended up deciding as a tax levy. This particular year that you're voting on right now, the allowable tax levy percent increase is 5.33%. We came up with 3.57% based on what we feel we need in order to balance the budget and provide the services that we need to provide for next year. That means that there's $260,149 that we're not asking the taxpayers for. And I want this to be an important point, especially as I continue to be your superintendent. One of the pieces when I'm working with boards of education to help create a budget is I like to be able to go to the taxpayers or see them at an event or something like that, look them in the eyes and tell them that we set a tax levy based on what we needed in order to run the school district the next year. So what some school districts do is this $260,000 that we're not asking taxpayers for, they would go ahead and they would tax for that and then put that in a reserve fund or something for the future. I'm just not a big believer in that. It's your money. It's not our money. It's your money. And what we want to do is be able to create a budget. And then if there's money that's left, quote, on the table, then it is what it is, because this amount of money, the 3.57% tax levy, is what we feel we need in order to balance the budget and make things happen for people for next year. Our focus areas for next school year is to be able to improve academic support for all students. That's kind of a constant, but when you look at the different pieces that go into staffing, probably number one and number two, focusing on reaching the socio, emotional, and academic needs of every student is kind of our whole child initiative. Many of you parents have seen this at home. You see what happens to students when things aren't consistent or when they have mental health issues or all of that. Well, every single employee that's here goes into helping out with supporting our whole child. Our custodians, our cleaners, our coaches, our bus drivers, our food service workers, our school counselors, our technology people, our administrators, our teachers, our paraprofessionals, everybody does. And you have to be able to keep a focus on that in order to make sure that students are getting all of the things that they need. And that's why it's going to become a big focus for us and continue to be a big focus for us each and every year. Also, one of the pieces that we've got to do here is, provide additional professional development for staff to better handle alternative learning. I think our teachers did a remarkable job this spring. We gave them basically 2 days to plan for what they're going to do in a virtual environment, and then said go. And then we've been trying to backfill the entire way, and we've learned a lot of things from that time on March 12th through now, and we will for the rest of the school year. But this summer, we'll be able to take all the things that went well and celebrate those, and we'll be able to take all the things that we need to improve upon and improve upon them with our teachers, so that if we have to start the school year next year in a virtual environment, or if we're in school for part of the time and home for part of the time, or if we're all able to come back in the fall and then there's another outbreak in the wintertime and we have to go home for a few weeks, we're going to be much better prepared than we were this spring. But like I said, hats off to all of our teachers, and hats off to the students, and hats off to you as parents for making this whole thing happen. It's unprecedented, and I thought we did very, very well. And then also what we want to be able to do is continue to increase access to and training for the use of technology at school and at home. And I think if you're a parent watching this, besides UPK, we sent Chromebooks home. We kind of learned how to use those at home and here at school and as a teaching tool. We'll be continuing to increase that. And I also want you to know, outside of the budget, I'm putting as much pressure as I can on the internet service providers with the help of our elected officials to be able to increase bandwidth and make it so that if we've got 3 people working from home and using that internet access, that everybody can actually do their work and not get completely frustrated, which I know has happened in some cases. And then I think down here at the bottom, number 5, continue to adapt to learning outcomes for all of our students so that every student finds opportunities for success is going to be something that's also a piece we're looking at. And that's always a learning opportunity for us. What COVID helped us to do when they said that there were going to be no Regents exams, Jen Taft and the counselors immediately seized that as an opportunity, like they always do, and went through every single student's transcript to see, okay, now that there's no Regents exams, what are other learning outcomes that we can do for these children? And as Regents exams come back into play, they learned a lot of processes and got better at a lot of processes that we can use next year and beyond. So here's kind of our budget in a nutshell. I'm going to show this to you a couple of different ways. I don't learn as well looking at a budget this way. I know some people like to look at graphs, so I wanted to include that. And so if you're more of a visual learner this way, if you take a look at our instruction at 51% of our budget, and take a look at the benefits, which is what we use to help support the people who are providing the instruction, you can see that 72% of our budget is going directly to instruction. And we want to have it that way. I've mentored superintendents where this combo right here is not even to 60%. And I'm like, what are you doing? We're a school. All that money should be going to educate students. You can see over here, our debt service is actually the money that we owe other people for money we've borrowed for like our capital project and that kind of thing is 9% of our budget. Transportation, I can't say enough about our transportation department and our central services. Leanne Shipman and Dan Blankenberg deserve a ton of kudos from our community for being able to keep costs down, but still deliver incredible services for our students and for us for that matter. And then also our administrative component, I want to say just a huge thank you to all of our administrators. Most school districts, if you do a search on the internet and look at the administrative piece, that can be as high as 10 or 11%. And the people that we have are working at maximum capacity to make sure that everybody has what they need to have each and every day. If that's not the way that works for you to take a look at the budget, this is kind of the way that I like to look at it. We can look at the budget in 2 ways, by type and by category. So when we look at the different pieces I just talked about, instruction, administration, you can put what we're spending this year up against what we're going to be spending next year to see the difference. There's 2 pieces I'll point out right here. You see a $207,000 decrease in instruction, and to balance the budget for next year, that's a reduction of 1 librarian, 1 speech therapist, and 4 paraprofessionals, which is where that comes from. The increase in debt service, well, we've got a capital project that's going on, and we borrowed money for that, and there are some payments that are due for that. So for this year only, you'll see an increase, which we budgeted for, and then next year you won't see that percent increase be as great because it'll be built into the budget as we balance things. One of the pieces that I always take a look at are employee benefits. You can see that that's up $260,000. Benefits are expensive. I thought that to the extent that they could, the health insurance providers, the teacher retirement system, the employee retirement system, I thought they sharpened their pencils as well as they could to have a $260,000 increase for the more than 300 employees that we have. To look at it a different way without the comparison, this is the proposed and the percent of the budget. Again, I point out the instruction and the benefits pieces right there, adding those 2 things together. So what happens is, we sit down and take a look at, okay, what's it going to take for us to be able to deliver services to students and run the shop as the center of the community for next year. And then we come up with that. And then we have to be able to say, how do we balance that? As I mentioned earlier, you can't operate in a deficit. Your budget in a school district has to balance. So I think you might find this interesting. There's kind of three ways that a school district gets its revenue. You have local share, which is from our tax levy. You have state sources or state aid, and then you have what's called other. And I'll explain what other means in just a few minutes. I have a graphic for that. And I want you to look over the history of time here for the school district. We were in the 40% of state aid. That bumped up to a little over 50%. And you can see now it's kind of leveling off to that 48.5% again. One of the things that I think, pardon me, I had to stand up for a second because the lights turned off because I was just sitting here. But I'm working. The 48.5%, I think that's going to increase in future years. And your share, or the local share, I think is going to decrease because so many of our community members were impacted by COVID, that I think as our free or reduced lunch percentage continues to increase, the economic impact on our taxpayers as far as the school budget is concerned will decrease. It'll be a lag of probably about a year, but I see where these columns are going to change hands a little bit. So to give you another representation of that, and I want to show you something that's new even for me, you can see our state aid is 47.3%, tax levy is 45.5%. Other 963,000. What can other be? I mean, other can be $5 you find on the floor, you put it in the pot, and that helps to balance the budget. It can be money that we get for sales tax and other types of revenues. We have this reserves and debt service at 440,000. So that's using reserves means using savings accounts that we've already designated to balance the budget. So a great example would be our capital project. We knew going into this that we were probably going to use some of our savings that we had in our capital project to ease that burden on the taxpayers and get the project done the way that it was approved by the voters a couple of years ago. And then we have that fund balance picture that I talked about earlier. The unique thing about this school year, and this is the first time I'm going to present this, is we have the federal CARES. So money that we've been spending since COVID in order to run the show, to clean, to provide meals, all those kinds of things are things that they're pieces that we're going to get reimbursed for. We're going to apply for reimbursement and get that money back. That money is called the Federal CARES Act, because what the state did is they took a portion of our money, every school, and they used it to help with the COVID effort at the state level. The federal money gave us some money to kind of fill that hole. Now, what you've been watching on the news is that the state still has a big hole to fill of, like, depending upon what news channel you watch, $8 million, $10 million, $12 million to fill. And that's why New York State is working with the federal government to find different ways to kind of close that bigger gap. And then we'll know the exact impact on the school districts and that kind of thing. But this is the first time I've ever presented the Federal CARES Act money as revenue for the school district. One of the pieces that I like to show, because I'm not sure that everybody knows what percent of the town that they live in makes up the school district. So I think this is a pretty cool slide to show. When you look at two things I want you to focus in on here. First of all, how many towns do make up our school district? I'm not sure that everybody knows that there are some parcels in Jerusalem that are in the Marcus Whitman School District, or Benton for that matter, are in the Marcus Whitman School District. So what you take a look at here is over on the right-hand side, Gorham is 56.1%. And then the next largest community for us is Middlesex, followed by Seneca. And then it moves on from there. So I just think it's an interesting study in this. The piece that I take a look at is when we have what we need to spend versus the money that we take in, and then using our reserves or fund balance, that leaves us with a difference that becomes the tax levy. My parents who are back home in Syracuse are on a fixed income. they're both retired. So this right here is the slide that I always use with them in trying to help them figure out what the tax impact might be on their home. And I think you could use this too if you were talking with your parents or whomever. We're going to take a home assessed at $100,000, and what we're going to do, there's the home value right here. We're going to take a basic star reduction. So if you are somebody that gets enhanced star because you're a certain age and at a certain income level, this 30,000 is going to be much greater, okay, than what it shows here. But if you're someone like me, I would have about a 30,000 for my township. I would subtract the two, get 70,000. That becomes the net taxable value. We've estimated on the previous slides, we've estimated a worst case scenario tax rate. We take that, we multiply the net taxable value times that tax rate. And so for this current year, the school tax bill that you paid this current year on a home of $100,000 would have been $916. Then what we do is we make some projections. And what we always try to do is we try to say, okay, what's the worst possible thing that can happen? So there's no construction in the community whatsoever from last May until the time tax bills go out and all of that. We say a worst case scenario tax rate would be $13.62. If that was the case, that tax bill would be $953 or a $37 increase over what people paid for school taxes this year. In each year that I've been superintendent, we have under promised and over delivered. I'll get that right on the fifth take here, except this is live, so I got to do it right the first time. Under promise and over deliver. So each and every year, this number, whatever you see in the circle, has been less than what I've presented. But the last thing I ever want to do to somebody is give you a number in this box and then see you out in the community and say, hey, superintendent, you told me it was going to be $37 and it was $38. I don't want to be that person. So I always try to give you a worst case scenario. You know, if I was looking at the current situation, I think this $37 could be somewhere between like $11 and $30, but it could be less than that for all I know. But I wanted to give you a worst case scenario there. This is the slide I would use if you're trying to explain to somebody, let's sit down and look at what your taxes might be for next year. There are some things that can impact the taxes on the levy. So if we find $147,000 on the floor, that's going to allow us to reduce the tax levy by 1%. And that's an important number that I look at to try to say, okay, if the state's going to give us extra money or if the state's going to take money away, 147,000 is 1%. If there are changes in assessed values, or if there are changes in equalization rates, or if there are changes in star exemptions, those three things can also have an impact on the tax levy. And, you know, I showed you some slides before where, you know, we have reserves or we can make additional reductions in order to balance the budget, but we feel that we're in good shape right now. So as kind of an overall summary, the appropriations or the money that we'd be spending for next year is a 3.79%. The money that we're using to balance the budget is a 3.99% increase. And then the tax levy itself is 3.57%. So I would normally say when you go into the voting booth or use your come here and fill out the sheets and put them in a computer, whatever you do, wherever you are, I would have that. This is a different year, so it's new for all of us. This is the first year that we're going to be doing our school budget vote 100% absentee. And so the exciting thing, I guess you can call it, the exciting thing was, and if you got my robocall today or saw my email, I was able to explain to you why when we started mailing them out on Thursday, some of you got 2 ballots and you should have gotten 1. Some of you didn't get any and that kind of thing. We work from a master list. We worked with our school attorney, Ferrara Forenza Law Firm, who does this stuff statewide. And what they showed us how to do was how to get the tax rolls from the various counties that we serve, Yates and Ontario, plus look at the people who voted in last year's school budget vote for Marcus Whitman, and then also make sure we captured all those students who turned 18 in time for the June 9th vote, put all those on a master list. We did that perfectly. That master list had some duplicates on it. And so Shireen Benedict, our board clerk, started going through all the duplicates and removing them. At the same time, the company that we worked with that was going to help us print the ballots said, don't worry about the duplicates. We have a computer program that'll take the duplicates out. And so they said, just send what you have and we'll take care of it from here. So we sent them what we had, which had the duplicates in there. And the rest is kind of history, which just again goes to show you that people are smarter than computers. Okay. So I apologize if you got a couple of extra ballots. What I'd ask you to do is recycle the ones that you don't need. Everybody gets one vote. So you make that vote and you can either use the return envelope and postage to send it back to us. We actually have a drop box located outside of the district office. If you come here for breakfast, lunch, or dinner service, you can give us your ballots then and we'll take those, or you can deliver them in person if you want to the office between the hours of 8 and 2. We are working with the company to get our money back for the ballots that they printed in error. And what we'll do is we'll just use this as a learning opportunity to say that we're not going to trust the computer. We are going to come up with a master list that has all the duplicates out of it before we print bills in the future. And I also want you to know too, we controlled the process by which we're counting the absentees, and we worked with our school attorneys on that. So on June 9th, when those ballots are counted, we have a process that'll make sure that no duplicate ballots make it through. So I think the rest of the process is going to be fine. I just think that some of these companies that printed ballots got themselves a little in over their heads with duplicates and that kind of thing. We weren't the only school district to have it happen, but nonetheless it happened. And so my apologies as the superintendent, and we can all just move on and kind of learn from it. So when you have your paper ballot, you're going to have a bunch of different propositions to select from. So the proposition 1 is exactly what I just explained. Do you support the 2020-21 budget in the amount of $33,598,700? You mark that. And then secondly, school buses. If you're new to voting on a school budget, when I was a new superintendent, you got buses when you needed them, because if I bought a school bus, and let's say my aid ratio down here at the bottom was 65%, I knew that if I spent $100,000 on a bus, the next week I was going to get a check back for $65,000 to help offset the cost of the bus. I'd get that from the state. Well, after the recession, they couldn't do that anymore. So they give you that 65%, but that 65% comes back to you over a period of 5 years. So Zoe Kalinsky in our business office has a spreadsheet, and what we calculate is we don't want our school bus purchases to have any additional impact on the taxpayers. So you have to find what we call that sweet spot of how many buses do you need, to make sure that you're safe on the road for our children. Because if you look down here, we have 37 buses. The miles that they travel per year, all of our buses, between 780,000 and 820,000 miles a year. When we do replace a bus, they've got 160,000 miles on them. Let's face it, these roads out here aren't all paved and aren't all roads that are gentle on school buses. So when we turn a bus in, it's ready to get turned in. But when we look at our spreadsheet to make sure that there's no additional impact on you as a taxpayer, for this year, it's 4 70 passenger buses and 1 30 passenger bus for a total cost of $490,474. Again, you won't see an increase in your taxes for that because of the amount of aid that we're bringing in. That's the sweet spot for this year, is that number. The library propositions are interesting. I grew into these, if you will, over the course of my career. So when I first became a superintendent, and let's say the local library needed some additional money, well, they would go out and they would have their own vote, and they would decide. They would ask their taxpayers, they'd ask the taxpayers to support the library vote. As time evolved, the law changed, and so a library can ask either a town or a school district to be a pass-through for what they need for their library budgets. So Each of these libraries have their own board of directors. They've got their own budgets. They have their own directors. The school district does not pay the libraries any of these taxes. What happens is on these propositions, if you support the Gorham Free Library and their increase of $2,600, then what'll happen is we're a pass through by our vote. If the town had a vote every single year, the library could put their ask on the town vote. They don't have one on the towns. They don't have one every single year. We do have one every single year, so it goes on the school vote. Again, it's a pass through. So if you have questions about why there's an increase in Gorham or Middlesex or Rushville, you would need to call those individual libraries, and they can explain to you why these increases are here. Okay, the school district, like I said, we're supportive of libraries. Certainly, we work with them all the time, but they're their own entities, and the money passes through based on what the outcome of the school vote is, and the library votes are. So those are those propositions that you have to select from as well. And then we have Board of Education candidates. All three of these people, Jeff Allen, Sue Campbell, and Phyllis Frantel, are currently on the Board of Education and are seeking re-election. So you would make those selections as well. And then for some of you, if you didn't get an absentee ballot, but think that you should have, you can contact our district clerk, Shireen Benedict, at 585-554-4848, extension 1805. The very, very important point I want to make is that absentee ballots are accepted until 5 p.m., not postmarked. They got to be here and in Shireen's hands as the district clerk by 5 p.m. on June 9th. So if you're going to mail that ballot and you have it, I would suggest that you mark it, get it in the mail tomorrow so that we have it in plenty of time. Every school around the state is doing this, and what that's doing is it's causing a lot of heavier volume at our post offices, and we want to make sure that we get those ballots in on time by 5 p.m. on June 9th. Thank you for taking the time to vote. I very, very much appreciate it. So I'm going to conclude with, how do we get here? All of the things that I've listed here don't cost anything, but they're priceless at the same time. And one of the pieces that we look at in terms of balancing our budget, running our school district, making sure that students have what they have, making sure that we continue to be the center of the community that you're proud of, is that we want to make sure that our communication is clear and concise. There's nothing hidden. Everything is transparent. We go to bed with all of our cards played every single night, that we collaborate whenever we can, that we're consistent in our approach, that we're unified as a school community. We do a lot of great things here at Whitman, and I think being unified is just super important in that approach and getting behind that pride in the paw that we do. And then I think the big thing for us is always trust. Trust is incredibly difficult to gain, but it's very, very easy to lose. And that's one of the pieces that I always take a look at, is making sure that we are always deserving of the trust of our community. And then lastly is composure. I think you can't always be walking around like something's on fire or that everything's a problem. You have to have it together. You have to have a plan. You have to make sure that you know how to execute the plan. You have to have some confidence. You have to trust in your community, and you have to be composed. I think when you're doing that, that's when great things happen, when you're doing all of these things. So, with that, I can't thank you enough. This, again, my first year as superintendent here in Whitman. It's been incredible. I know we've gone through some challenges, but you know what? We're going through them together. And when I had an opportunity to ride, I was very honored to be asked to be able to ride in the Memorial Day parade yesterday. Just getting a chance to see all the community members and all the things that this community does. It's just remarkable, and I'm very, very proud to be superintendent, and you should be very, very proud to be community members here. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the screen share here. I'm going to unmute my friends and colleagues here on the Board of Education to see if they have, hang on a second here, to see if they might have any questions. Let's see, I'm going to unmute. And if you've got questions while you're watching this broadcast, just please feel free to use the chat feature. I'm going to unmute who I can here. Okay, so right now we don't have any questions right now through the chat. But if any of our board members have questions, just feel free to ask them, and I'll answer them as best I can. Okay, great. And I want to thank Shireen Benedict, who's been our moderator for tonight. We don't have any questions on the chat. Doesn't mean you can't ask a question. So if you're not watching this broadcast, I know I try to be as exciting as I can, but I know I'm competing with a great weather night. I'm going to have this, I'll have a link to this out on our Facebook, on our Twitter, on our website by tomorrow. It takes a little bit of time for this to finish recording and what's called render. Once that's done, I'll have it out. If you take a look at it and have any questions, you can give me a call or send me an email or whatever, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. So with that, I thank you for taking the time tonight to watch this, or taking the time tomorrow or whenever you do. Again, please be sure to get those ballots in by June 9th at 5 p.m. Please don't wait. I would love to have your vote counted, and I will see all of you soon. Thank you very much, and pride in the paw. Have a good night.
Bye.